Session we talked about Payadikrama Vidhi. So, which are those conditions in which we can actually do Payadi conditions? Payadikrama in Jwara.
Bangalore in 1993. MD in Dravya Guna from GMC Bangalore.
And also the folklore and traditions and how exactly to apply that. We also discussed a few cases. So now what is important for us to understand is when not to give. See, is to know when to give. Very helpful, no doubt. But then it's also important to know when not to give. I'll just give you an example to begin with. Why Nishedha is important in this case especially. There was this young doctor who just completed his BMS, very ardent student that he was. He, from Bangalore, he got an MD seat in North India in Rajasthan, and then he went and got admitted himself over there. So it was very, very hot. The season was very, very hot. And within a week, he ended up with Jwara. So he was also a practitioner here. He had just started practicing also. So what he did was, out of that confidence in himself and the Shastra that he studied, he started with Payadikrama. Absolute no medication for the first 6 days. So he just prepared Paya and then had it. And then, but Jwara just didn't budge even an inch. After a week, he got so weak, and the fever is also so high that he had to literally somebody had to help him to even to go to the loo. So, but still he thought, okay, 6 days. Here you have until Amapachana has to happen, or until 6 days. So then Amapachana has not happened. So he continued for another 2 days or 3 days, because Puranatva happens after 9 days, according to Shastra. So he thought, let me continue till 9. Probably this klama will happen as a process when Pachana is happening. So let me continue it for 9 days. So he did continue. By the time he reached 9th day, he also developed kasa and a lot of kapha coming out, and still he lost a lot of weight, and the Ushma kept on increasing. So people around were, his classmates and everyone around were really scared, and they thought of admitting him, and that is when he decided to call. So when we heard the call, it was so feeble. Why is it? So then we understood the whole thing, what has happened. So what had happened in this case? See, we stopped Payadi and we started with something else. Now you have to tell me what is that. And then within a day or two, his temperature reduced. Of course, he took a lot of time to regain his weight and strength. It took some time. That's a different thing. Now, what happened here? See, this comes under the condition, those list of conditions in which actually Paya in Jwara is contraindicated. Now, which are those conditions in which Payadi is contraindicated? He gives a list. Now, let us go to Charaka. Continuing the same prakarana that we were doing, chapter 3, Chikitsa. In that, yesterday we saw till Jaragno Jwarasatmitva Tasmat Deyabhiraditaha. That was one prakarana. So immediately after that he talks about Nishedha. Jwaran upachare diman rite madhya samudhitan madatye madhya nitye grishme pittakaphadike urdhage raktapitte cha yavagurna hitajvare. Even if it is Taruna Jwara, then consider these list of conditions, and if it is these conditions, don't give Yavagu, don't give Paya, absolutely in these conditions. So here, this boy, it was a condition in Grishma. Vagbhata goes further and gives very clear specificity. There is Pittasthana Gate Kafe. Madate Madhyanithi Grishme Tayorva Adikayoho and all that, and then Pittasthana Gate Kafe. Very clear specific. Here it is just Pittakapadike. Then Sthana also he includes as Pittasthana Gate Kafe. Now this boy had Pittakapadika Jara in Grishma. Now that is how, and he's also Pitta Prakriti, by the way. So that is how it was not coming down. Instead, it was raising continuously. So what we did was we stopped Ayavagu. We started with Tattu Prayoga, Tarpana Prayoga. And once he shifted to Tarpana Prayoga, he started regaining strength. The temperature went down, and then after that, within a day or two, his Jara Samprapti had gone, Jara Mukta Lakshana, the Anulomana happened properly, and his Agni got restored. Now, this is one case. Now, there's another case which I remember. It was this little infant, 6-month-old infant. Okay. So, this 6-month-old infant belonging to Bangalore, born in Bangalore, parents are from Bangalore. But when the baby was fine, absolutely healthy, on breast milk. And when the baby was 6-month-old, they had to visit a friend in Bijapur. So Bijapur is a place in Karnataka where you have it's absolute high temperature, and in Grishma it is really, really bad, very ruksha, Jangala, typical Jangala Desha. The child, they had taken all the extra care, no food variations, only home cooked food and all that. And there's not much of travel, nothing. Traveled by train, and as the train entered into Bijapur, and then by the time they went and reached their room, exactly in the morning they reached by around 6 o'clock. By 7:30, as the sun rays came up, we saw that the infant started developing fever. There's absolutely no other reason. Okay, so cold pad, all that, and of course we can't give Parikrama to the child, so mother started taking that. And Stanlepa was done, nothing was helping. He was kept so high, the baby was continuously crying. So there was an old woman who was actually accompanying the team, one grandma. That grand old lady took the baby in the hand and said, "Hey, this is because of heat. This is not actual Jara that every children has. This is because of heat." And you know what she did? She just took some pomegranates and she just squeezed it in the hand. And with that, she added a little larger, mixed it, and then she gave it directly to the baby. And then everyone in the house was saying the baby is still on, only breast milk. Nothing. She said, "No, don't give breast milk for 2.5 hours until this is done. After that, no need." And the whole bottle of around, it must be around 200 ml, and was drinking so fast. And by the time that actually it must have taken around 5 to 10 minutes, by the time it got over, the infant started sweating, and literally within 5 to 10 minutes we saw the temperature reduced. Maybe because it was cold, the child was drinking, so probably it is because of that. But no, the fever didn't come back. After 1.5 to 2 hours, the child was hungry again and the breast milk started. And from then on, we started giving the mother Tarpana, and the baby was able to handle the heat very well. Another couple of days, they came back, absolutely no issue at all. Now, what happened in this case? See, this case also, it is Grishma, and in Grishma, the baby had Jara. So that condition again indicated that, we need to give Tarpana. So these are a few examples that it clearly indicates that we need to have a discrimination of not to give Parikrama in Jara. So now let us try to understand this sutra stepwise. Rite madhya samuktidat मदात्यये मध्यनित्ये ग्रीष्मे पित्तकफादिके ऊर्ध्वगे रक्तपित्ते च यवागुर्न हिताज्वरे. When we do अन्वय, ज्वरे पेयादिभिः आदितः ज्वरान् धीमान् पेयादिभिः ज्वरान् उपचरेत् आदितः. ऋतुे मध्यसमुत्थितात् मदात्यये ज्वरे मध्यनित्ये ज्वरे ग्रीष्मे ज्वरे पित्तकफादिके ज्वरे ऊर्ध्वगे रक्तपित्ते ज्वरे यवागुः न हितः. What do we understand by this Anvaya? What we understand is the person who has got Jwara because of Madhya. Madhya itself is the Nidana for Jwara. No Peyadi. And there's a Madatya condition in a patient. Madhya is not the Nidana for the Jwara, but the person has Madatya. Then also no Peyadi. See, there's another condition where there's no Madatya. And Madhya is not the reason also. But the person has the habit of consuming Madhya every day. And that person, because of some other Nidana, has got Jwara. Then also we should not give Peyadi. Grishma, the Jwara which comes in Grishma. Don't give Peyadi. Give Tarpana. Pitta-kapha-dike Jware. See, further in later shlokas, we have references which speak of giving Yavagu in Pitta Jwara and Yavagu or Peyadi in Kapha Jwara also. But when it comes to Pitta-kapha-dika Jwara, then Peyadi should not be given. How is it? Why is it? Here we are speaking of Vikriti Vishama Samavaya combination, samsarga of Pitta-kapha-dika Jwara. There is a condition in the body where Pitta and Kapha both have actually got vitiated, but they have combined in such a way that the both combination has given the Jwara. There can be another kind of samsarga which Pitta is vitiated, Kapha is vitiated, but the combination is Prakriti Samavaya. This does not apply to that kind of fevers. This applies to the Vikriti Vishama Samavaya combination of Pitta Kapha in the formation of Jwara. In those conditions, don't give Peyadi. Urdhvage Raktapitte cha. So this reference, we do have a cross-reference directly in the Prakarana of Raktapitta, where they say Urdhvage Tarpanam Purvam Yojyam. Isn't it? Although for Raktapitta itself, Tarpana is a line of treatment, if a Urdhvaga Raktapitti gets fever, then also, even for that, in that fever, treating in that fever condition, do not give Peyadi, but actually give only Tarpana. Yavagu na hitaha. These are not, Yavagu is not beneficial. Now the question is why? So, there is a reference that we come across in Chakrapani. Pamshudhane yata vrishtihi vedayatyadikardamam तथा श्लेष्मणि समृद्धे यवागु श्लेष्मवर्धनी. I generally remember the example of watching in some dry areas and bus stands, in places where people actually gather a lot. There's a lot of dust, but then you realize how dirty the place is and how much of slasam panka can happen only when one rain happens. All that dried up things just dries up. It becomes wet and it becomes very filthy. So the same thing happens when a person has kapha already. What happens is when you give Yavagu, in the process of increasing that kleda in the body, Yavagu, Peya, the entire group actually, adds on a lot of kleda to it. So that further brings about a lot of complications. And what happens in the combination of Pitta Kapha? We know Pitta is Ushna and we know उष्णेन युक्ताः स्निग्धाद्याः कफस्य प्रकोपम् शीतेन युक्ताः स्निग्धाद्याः कुर्वते श्लेष्मणश्चयम्. Isn't it? So when Ushna gets added to that, that increased Shleshma becomes Prakupita. Now what is Prakupita? Unmarga Gamita. It's already filled Shleshma, but Ushnata Samparka has come to it. It just melts and then that starts moving to other places. So that is when complications happen. Other disease sampraptis also can begin. In this condition, if you give Evagu, then the kleda increases even further. And the whole purpose of giving Evagu, we saw in the last class how the purpose of giving Kleda or Evagu is to bring about Agni Vriddhi, Lagutva, so increases prana, doshanulomana happens, and here nothing happens. Instead, the whole inner process, samprapti, increases with a lot of addition of the kleda, and the jwara keeps on increasing and complications rise further. So that is how it should not be given in Pitta Kapha. Vakpata identifies that specificity in Pittasthana Gata Kapha. And this Pittasthana Gata Kapha is another prakarana in which this condition is mentioned and it's important. That is in Kalpa. In Kalpa, when we have to do Vamanam, after Madana Kalpa, everything, I think it is Vimutta Kalpa, if I remember right. It is clearly indicated specifically in a condition where in Pittasthana there is Kapha-sankhya, Kapha-utklesha. So then Jimutta is indicated. So this is a typical condition. That's what I'm trying to bring your focus on. This is a typical condition where a lot of care is needed. We should not just go by the general principles when we identify that Kapha-utklesha is present in Pittasthana, and here in Pittasthana we are referring to Grahani, of course. Adhva Amashya. As we know, Urdhva Amashya is the Prakrita Sthana for Kapha. Adhva Amashya is supposed to be the Prakrita Sthana for Pitta. But due to some particular nidanas, usually a combination of Ahara and Vihara, a typical combination of Ahara and Vihara, suppose if Kapha-utklesha starts happening happening in Pittasthana, and Pitta Swasthana, so the Ushna will generally be there, and Kapha-sankhya happening there, will naturally be affected by Ushna, and we know what happens later on if this deadly combination happens. So in those conditions, very consciously we need to avoid Yavagu or the entire Peyadikrama. Now, what about Madhya? See, we have Madhya Samudrita or Madhatyaya or Madhyalipya. In whatever condition, if there is jwara, please don't give Peyadi. But why? What happens? For this we need to go back to Madhatyaya and see the gunas of Madhya and understand what exactly happens in the body. See, we know that Madhya is Ushna, Ishna, and it is Vyavaya Vikati. So it has the ability directly to go to Madhyama Roga Marga. And it brings about a marked Ojokshaya. So the Bala in the Madhyama Roga Marga, especially in Hridaya, is at its low. That is the condition in Madhya, it could be Madhya Nitya or Madhatyaya. So more than that, what happens is the kleda is there, a lot of kleda is there, Dhatu Bala is less. And now, this is a very typical deadly condition. So that is how even in Madhatyaya, if we refer Madhatyaya Chikitsa, there is Vamanam indicated. After Vamanam, give Dharanam. Even after Vamanam, don't give Peyadi. Then, let me just tell you the yeah. Refer Naraka Chikitsa 24, Sutra number 140 onwards. Amashayastham utkristam kapapittam madhatye vigyaya bahudoshasya dahyamanasya drishyataha मध्यं द्राक्षारसं तोयं दत्त्वा तर्पणमेव वा निःशेषं वामयेत् शीघ्रम् एवं रोगात् विमुच्यते. A very interesting prayoga where tarpana only is given directly, either draksharasa or tarpana, for akantapana also. Even for akantapana. What do we give generally for akantapana when we're doing vamana? We give either HD Fanta or Kshira or Dani or Ikshurasa, isn't it? So when this condition is there is specificity in giving akantapana also. Give tarpana only for akantapana. What happens when we give tarpana for akantapana? Tarpana is a sandarpaka, sadhyo balakara. So hridaya is protected. There is no risk. In a madati or a madhyanitya or any condition which has come out of madhya, the first important thing is to protect the madhyamarumarka, the marmas, because they would have become very vulnerable. Of course, not related to Jwara directly, or rather, I just want to share a case which was treated by one very good Ayurveda doctor actually. There was a 60-and-odd-year-old person who was suffering from a typical kind of fever, and there were all conditions indicative for vamana. The person had kapha klesha, it was an amashaya, the nidana was there, sadhyo jatra, after food the fever would increase. So he decided that he will do vamana for that case. So the patient was admitted and sadhya vamana was given with simple dravyas, kshira, akantapana, simple madana kashaya, not even high dose. The person did vamana. Healthy did happen. Proper vamana happened. But post vamanam, he had an issue he had a complication. He developed a complication. And that was also a case which had Rishta Lakshanas a week or 10 days ago, and he finally expired. We were discussing the case, and of course, here it's not to say that it's because of vamanam that he expired, not that. He had a chronic problem also. But the purpose of vamanam was not achieved here. So when we were discussing this case, what we realized was there was a typical nidana in this patient. He was eating gutka every day and he had alcohol every day. So with that weak madhyama rogamarka, to go ahead with vamanam itself was not a very wise decision. And the next, even if we have to do in Advaita sometimes, then make sure that we give tarpana or draksharasa or something which will be protecting your hridayam. Person's hridayam. The ojas is not put into risk, and then go ahead with it. So that would be very sensible, and that is what is the reference that we get. Vijnaya bahudoshasya dakyamanasya drishyataha. When there is that bahudosha, when there is daha, vamanam is indicated, right? So then give either madhyam only for akantapana, draksharasam, toyam or tarpanameva. Then after this, निःशेषं वामयेत् शीघ्रम् एवं रोगात् विमुच्यते काले पुनः तर्पणाद्यं क्रमं कुर्यात्. Just as we have Peyadi Kramam, we also have Tarpanadi Kramam. This we come across in the Samsarjana Prakaranam also, here also. Now what is that Kramam? What is that Tarpanadyam Kramam? Tarpanaha Adihi Esham Te Tarpanadihi. Tam Tarpanadyam, right? So what is that Krama? For Peya, we know, give Manda, then Peya, Samskrita, Asamskrita, then Samskrita, and after that go to Yavagu, and then Odhanam. That's how it is. But in Tarpana, how do we go about? One is how do we prepare, and second is what is the Krama? How exactly to go about? We'll come to that later. Now this is about Madhya Samudhita Jwaran, Madhya Madhyanitya. Grishme. Why not Peyadi in Grishma? Grishma is the Rutu in which we know what the Sanchaya would have happened. And Grishma is also that Rutu of the entire Samvatsara, where Bala of the person is in its ultimate low, the lowest. And it's also the condition where you're not supposed to give Ushna even to a normal person. Ushnodaka, all that is not indicated in Grishma, isn't it? So Panakadi is indicated in Grishma even in a normal person. So and we should also know that Vata Sanchaya happens here, and in the next Rutu, that is in Varsha Rutu, Vata will have a very typical combination in the body of Vata Prakopa and Pitta Sanchaya. With a lot of Kleda outside, that is in the environment, in the nature, and also inside the body. Now, with this condition, in Grishma, when a person gets Jwara, we have the challenge of ensuring that the Bala doesn't go down, or rather Bala remains well, and also the Dosha Nirharana happens. So that is how Sadhyo Balakaraha Tarpanaha Sattvaha Sadhyo Balakaraha. So that's how we give Tarpana instead of Veyadi in Grishma. Use that Tarpanadi Krama, and through that ensure that Malanadomana happens, Agnidipana happens, and along with it, Bala is also maintained or rather increased in the process of treatment. So that is how in Grishma also Peyadi is contraindicated and Tarpanadi is indicated. Urdhvage Raktapitta. We know directly that in Urdhvaga Raktapitta, we have a direct indication of Tarpana also. Why? There we get that combination of Pitta and Kapha again. We know that in Rakta Pitta, the main dosha involved is Pitta. And in Urdhvaga Rakta Pitta, it's Kaphanubandhi. So that's how there is the disease itself, there's a Kartritva combination of Pitta and Kapha. So when there is a combination of Pitta and Kapha, Peya is not indicated. So that will complicate. So that is how it is contraindicated in Urdhvaga Rakta Pitta also. In Urdhvaga Rakta Pitta, when a person gets Jwara also, not to give Peyadi. We have a few experiences with treating patients who have leukemia. And this is something which I have observed by treating those cases, that when there is fever very typically in patients with that condition. So there, even by mistake, we cannot afford to give Peyadi. We have to resort to Tarpana, and in Tarpana we can choose which Phala Rasa we are adding and which Laja we are adding and how we are preparing. See, that is a matter of choice according to the case. But as far as Kalpana is concerned, a big no to Peyadi and a big yes to Tarpanadi even there. Now, what is this Tarpanam? Tatra Tarpanamevagre Prayojyam Lajasattubihi Dvarapahaihi Phalarasaihi Yuktam Samadhu Sharkaram. So this gives an idea of how exactly we need to prepare. Generally, Kalpana is a name given to the Kalpana because of its action. That brings about Krithi in the Dhatu. So that is how it is called Kalpana. But actually the Kalpana is a Mantha Kalpana. We know that. Now, Dvarapahaihi Phalarasaihi. Now, which is the best Dvarapaha Phala? Draksha Phalottama. And even in the Shruti of Draksha, we see that it is Dvaragna. So, Draksha is best when we are using it for Gari. Dadima is also okay. It's quite good. So generally, it is Draksha Dadima, a common one. Apart from that, there are other phala which can be used. Like we have this reference quoted by Chakrapani. Draksha Dadima Kharchura Priyalai Saparushakaihi Tarpanarheshu Kartavyam Tarpanam Jvaranashanam. So it's seasonal fruits like, Pansa, which is not available in, or rather I have not seen them much in South India, but very common in North India. So when we are treating cases in North India, better to resort to either the Munaka Draksha. Draksha, many types we come across, like the tiny one, which is called Kismet, or The larger ones with the seed, the black ones with the seed. And when we do prayoga, we see that each one of them there's a little difference in the way they act. As I have seen, the best draksha which can be used for tarpana are those bigger ones with the seed. And prepare tarpana with the seed, crush the seed until it is powdered completely and use the whole fruit. And that is a good anulomaka also, much more than the tanya ones. So choose the right kind of draksha, and we also have to keep in mind, especially in IPD cases when we are actually treating, suppose if one fruit in which they use the maximum pesticides probably is draksha. It's completely dipped into a solution of pesticides, and that is what I have heard and seen also. So there was a study which I came across where the grapes that we actually get was boiled for 5 minutes in hot water and still the skin contained it. So let us be careful when we are talking about it. Yes, draksha still acts wonderfully well, but still, whenever we have access to the purer ones, that are better ones, then let us choose that and suggest them or use them also, because that is something we need to keep in mind. Draksha, Dadima Adini includes Kharjura, Yala, Rushaka. In Kharjura, we have two types, right? The dried ones and the fruit ones, ripe ones. So here, when we are using for preparing tarpana, use the fruit, the softer ones, the dates, not the dried ones, but the fruit ones, because phala rasa, it has to be completely phala. So soak them properly, make a kalka, soak them properly, and then do a mantha, filter it, and in that phala rasa, add laja churna, whichever laja. It could be from paddy, it could be from ragi, it could be from whatever we talked about satmya in the previous class, applies here also. Apply that taktu, and then prepare a sharkara, add sharkara, little madhu, and then give. Do that. Now, when to give madhu, when to add madhu, and when not to add madhu. Now, there is a discretion that we need to know here. When we are dealing with conditions which has a lot of kapha in it, let us make sure that we add madhu. In the very initial stages of practice, when we were using tarpana, I always had a preconceived notion. Especially, I remember the first case in which I gave tarpana. There is jwaram and I'm giving something which is cold. I have not even boiled it. So I took a lot of care to boil the water, bring it to room temperature, use that water for doing mantha, and then I had given. I still remember that what happened in my mind when I did it for the first time. But to my surprise, I found that just didn't matter at all. When you give this just cold, it starts working the way it has to. And that is the beauty of watching Shastra Vakya come into reality in practice. So later on, realized the direct, clean, good water can also be used. Anyway, Kvotita Sheetalam water is a nice way of using it when we are doing it for patients. But again, the basic principles of Kvathana and Kvotita Sheeta, we need to follow. We can't use the water which we have boiled and kept overnight the next day. Why? Any idea? Are you all there? Hello?
It becomes guru, ma'am.
Vyushitam tridoshakrita. Vyushitam jalam tridoshakrita bhavati. So boiling water on the previous day, keeping it overnight and then give it the next day, it is tridoshakara. So you are actually adding a dangerous nidana. This is true not just for tarpana, but even for daily use. There are people, I have seen people when say, use boiled cool water, they boil in the night so that then, especially in summer, the previous day they boil it, put it into the filter or something, and then it stays there overnight. The next day it is drinkable in terms of temperature. So it can be used. But that, in terms of its guna, can become tridoshakara, and you're adding a very dangerous nidana. So let's take care about that. No Yoshi Tattva. That is not keep it overnight. Even if you're cooling it, use the cooling techniques of Sushruta that he has spoken of. He has talked very nicely about Shiti Karna procedures. Keep it in an open thing, switch on a fan or filter it through a cloth. Do all those techniques, but then you can cool it immediately. It's quite fast that way. Of course, not to keep it in the fridge. So that can be done, but not keep it overnight and use. Piyala and Parushaka. All these fruits can be used, and we have also used fruits like anjeer in conditions where it is advised, not in Jwara, of course, in Rakta Pitta. We have used that and it works out very well. I still remember using one day some strike and some situation which did not permit us to access or get Dadima or Draksha, and there was this case which ultimately we had to give. And the other challenge was, he was a little boy, a hyperactive boy from Dubai who had got admitted. He had autism already and he had Jwara. It was Grishma. We had to give Tarpanam. But he was very, very choosy. And we know when with autism kids, you have to be really very careful because they can get into a phase which can be a hell for the parents, the entire hospital staff for the entire day. Among juices, he would drink only orange juice, nothing else. And they have this habit, once they are habituated to something, and that alone they will take. They are not receptive to anything else at all, come what may. So in that case, we had prepared a tarpana out of orange juice and given him. And it had worked very well also. So what I mean to say is there is option for us to venture creatively, provided general rules, the basic rules are followed. Okay. Now, what is that krama that we were talking about? Tarpanadi krama. Tarpana is a peya. I mean patum yogyaha peyaha. Something to be drunk. So the consistency is of liquid. But in one prakaranam, Chakrapani speaks of two things. Tarpanam and Santarpanam. Two kinds of prayoga. And in, I think in Sutrasthanam, in Saptu, when talking about Saptu, we have this reference where he talks about Avalehika and Tarpana and Pinda. Saptu Pinda. Let me just give you the reference somewhere. I must have noted it down. It's not in my mouth. I'll just tell you. Give me 2 minutes. So, in that, you start with Tarpana and you end with Santarpana. Now, what is the difference between Tarpana and Santarpana? In Tarpana, you don't add Sneha. In Santarpana, you have Saktu Prayoga with Phalarasa and Ghrita. You remember that reference of Yajna Purushiya in Agra? Sama Ghrita Saktu Prayogaha Udavartaharanam Shreshtaha. So that is even beyond Santarpana Prayoga. Santarpana is the name of Tarpana. So even beyond that, you have this Samagrita Saktu Prayoga. Okay. So in Tarpana, the krama, what you do, you start in the first day with very dilute, just you have the Draksha Rasa, very little Sattu added to it, Sarkara added to it, and you do a Manta Prayoga and you give it to the patient. One Ahar Kala to Ahar Kala, the Agni improves, Bala improves, the Jwara reduces, Swedana happens. Yes, it does happen. Patient feels very much better. So later on, when he's really hungry, don't shift directly to rice or the staple roti, whatever the person is taking. Instead, go from mantha to next, prepare it as a leham. Avaleham, the Kalpana, not Agnipaka, of course. The same Mantha Kalpana in the form of a thicker version of it. You have no water added to it, just the thick juice of the fruit, and then to that you add more of larger churna, little of sharkara, whatever needed, and then you mix it up and the person eat it, lick it. It's in a consistency in which the person can lick. And even when that starts getting digested, then you start adding a little sneha to that. Now here the question comes, can we add grita to a Shita Kalpana? It's a Shita Kalpana, isn't it? Can we add grita? But let us remember that we are also adding madhu. So when madhu is added to grita, that helps in balancing and digesting also. I am talking of jwara cases. So when that is also died, we have also added namanita in certain cases. It works very well. And after that, especially when in Pitta Kapha Jwara, when Pitta Prabalya is there, then we do add a little namanita to it. And after that, make it even more thicker where the person can eat it. And then you go add more krita to it. And once the person is normal and the bala is established, then you go to normal food gradually. Now this is how is Tarpanadikramam. Then this Tarpanadikramam is found in Samsarjanakrama also. There also we have the same combination in the order in which we need to proceed one after the other. Now, there I need to give you that reference. Just a minute, give me a moment. Okay, I think I'll just put it in the group later on. Or somewhere far away. See, this is from Ashtanga Hridaya Annaswarupa Vijnaniyam. Sutra number 2839, where he talks about Saktu Prayoga. Rules to be used for Saktu Prayoga. Saktavo lagava kshudra shramanetramaya pranan granti santarpana panat satyeva balapadaha nodakantaritan nadvir nanishayam nakevalan nabhuktva nadvijaischitva saktun adhyatnava bahun. This is a healthy person, of course. In this prakarana, when we see Sarvang Sundari Tika, he talks in the last few lines, Charti Shramanun Mantaha, Cheetas Trishna Nivartakaha, Rameha Kshaya Kushtani Najasyur Mantabayinam. Let's remember this, we'll talk about it. Nijayat Kadina Gurvi Pindi Prokta Mrudur Laghu Saktunam Dravata Yogat Laghi Yasvavalehika. Large Saktu Krita Pisya Vilepi to Garihasi. So all the kalpanas done out of large Saktu is talked about here. You have Avalehika, you have Pindi, and then you have Laja Vilepi. Of course, in Jwara we are not talking about Laja Vilepi because that goes under the same Laja is used for, if we remember, we saw the 11 conditions in Peyadikrama with different Aushadha Prayoga in Charaka. So there also Laja is only used for Peyadi. But the Laja when added directly to Draksha Rasa or Rasa, then the mantra is prepared and given is what we are talking about now. Apart from Vilepi, we have the Mantha, then Avalehika, then Pinda. So this is how we have the Krama. And the starting from Tarpana to going ahead to Santarpana, this becomes the Krama that we will be using. Of course, this general principle applies to Tarpanadi Krama when we are giving Saktu also. What is that? Nodakantaritan. Don't give water to drink when we are giving Mantha. The person is taking it in between Anupana. No. Mantha itself is Mantha. It could be Avalehika, whatever. Don't give water in between to drink. Na dvihi, na nishayam. So here we would say in the night, don't give Saktu instead of that. preferable to give in the morning ahar colors. What if the person is hungry in the night? Reduce the dosage. Don't give large quantities. That may have an impact on the agni. Na kevalam, that doesn't apply here. Na kevalam sattu. So don't give only sattu. We are giving us svanta here, so no problem. Na bhukva. Later when they shift to normal food, it's not like, sometimes patients come back and ask. When I took that, it's generally very tasty also. So when I took that, I used to feel very energetic and I continued that after food. Absolutely no. Na bhuktva, having food and then taking tarpana is not advisable. Na dvijaihi chitva, here dvija refers to teeth. So na dvijaihi chitva, don't chew it. This is true of avalehika and pindi and santarpaka later on. In the last later parts of the Tarpana Dikrama, the Kalpanas when we give, then make sure the person drinks it or swallows it or just licks it. Never to chew it. Nava bahun. Not too much of a quantity. Now this needs to be taken care because it's tasty. So the person generally wants to eat more. So take care of the pramana. Not too much. Okay. The same thing what Hemadri, the next one, speaks of Nijayat Katina Gurvi Prokta Pindi Lagur Mrudu. What we make that ladus out of sattu. That anyway, we are not considering in Dwara, but that is the pindi. The person should be able to digest that in the end. Sattunam Dravatayogat Lagpiyas Yavalehika Shashkuli Modakadinam Vyakyata Eva Chakalpana Karkanda Badaradinam Ramashrut Kama Idaha Sakto Amlarasa Ya Yatha Dravya Gunaschate. Now this is what I want to focus on. Hridyaha. Hridyaha can have two meanings. One, close to the heart. I mean, you can relish it. That's a general meaning. And the second important one is it is a very good protective to the heart. It protects the heart. So when there's a possibility of ojukshaya in the patient, do use Tarpana. Now let me share a few cases of COVID where there is typical ojukshaya lakshanas that we do observe. In those cases, how Tarpana helped. See COVID was a new thing, right? In the beginning especially. So when there is Jwara, we went by exact Jwara Chikitsa with Kriyadikrama in the beginning. But there was a stage when there were 2-3 different types of patterns we observed in people. There was one kind of group of people who had initially fever was there, body pains were there, throat pain was there, and little kasa was there. So as long as this fever is there, we gave only peya with Samskrita peya, and then observed fever would go down. But if you think that fever has gone down, so everything is fine, then give a food. Because immediately the next day no fever, but then shwasa would get, the person would get shwasa and extreme weakness, extreme weakness, bhaya. Not just because of media, but even in Pravarasattva patients, we have seen at a particular stage where Ojukshaya happens. Now that is when after the initial 1 or 2 cases, we realized no, this is a condition where we need to immediately shift. So what we would do is, we divided the cases we observed the pattern. In cases which had Pikan Bandi, we did not go for Peya in the initial stage. We would start with actually Tarpana in those cases. Dadimasvarasa with Rajasattu, prepare Tarpana and then give only that for food. So we saw that it worked very well in those cases, and it did shift to the Ojukshaya stage, especially when Pitta association of Pitta was more. Then this worked. But when the association of Vata was more, we still continued with Peya for the initial 1 day or 2 day, dependent on the case. keenly observing when it is going to shift. If fever reduces, Jwaramukta Lakshana appears, then immediately we would start on Sneha for that case to ensure that Ojakshay does not happen, and even it does happen, then it got resolved immediately. So we saw that these two kind of different patterns that we saw in people treating COVID cases also. Initially one in Vata Pradhana, whatever. Vata was there in both of them, no doubt. So when Vata was associated, we did Peyadi, but when Pitta was associated, we did Panadi. And there, especially Dadima, in cases from North India, we saw that Draksha worked very well. But in cases in South India, we saw, well, I don't know why, but this is what was our observation, needs more to come to a conclusion. Dadima really worked very well. Probably Satmya aspect could be, but then that's how it was in our experience. But this Hridyam, what Himadri is talking about here, that Hridyam was very evident. There were cases when even when they were taking other treatments, but then the Ojakshaya was continuing, so they came back to Ayurveda for help. We would start with Navanita and Laja Prayoga immediately. And we saw that really helped. The Bala was came back, and other issues also were handled. Food aspect. So this is about the Tarpanadikrama to be given in cases where Peyadikrama is not indicated. There is something else also that we need to talk about now. When to give. Anna Kaleshu, immediate next sutra, Tatra Satya Balapekshi Pujaye Dhirna Tarpanam Nuna Mudrayushena Jangalanam Rasenava Anna Kaleshu Japyasmai. Now, this sutra will give us a Dhvanita. Let me read it slowly. Tatra Satya Balapekshi Bhojayet Dhirna Tarpanam Sati. Atmapalapekshi bhojayet. So that means to say you give tarpana once. Once that gets digested, then observe his satmya and give nuna mudgayushena jangalena rasenava. A vegetarian take mudgayusha, non-vegetarian can go ahead with jangala rasa. When annakaleshu. So that means to say, in the initial phases, when you're doing Tarpanadikrama, give Tarpana in Aharakala, then shift to Avalehika, shift to the next stage. Then when you are going for, when the patient is ready for Anna, then what you do in one early in the morning or one Aharakala, give Tarpana, and once that gets digested, Aharakala comes in. In Aharakala, give Anna with Mugayusha or Jangala Rasa, depending upon the case and the Satmya there. Now, this is the method that we need to go ahead. Okay. This is one whole set of conditions where we have to give Tarpanadikrama. But what we were trying to understand was not just Tarpanadikrama, which are all the conditions that Paya should not be given in Shethapat. One among them is this group, when Tarpana is indicated. There are some more conditions also. Suppose if it is not Karunajwara, if it is Dhirnajwara, then please don't give Peyadi. The person will become weaker. So instead, go ahead and give Sneha, Grita directly. Even if the Jwara pursues, it is continuing, it's persistent. Then also go ahead and give Grita Prayoga. It could be a Samskrita Grita Prayoga or whichever, depending on the condition. Move ahead and give. It could be like giving Snehapana or Kshira with Grita, Kshira Paka with Grita itself, or prepare food like, Khichdi or Pongal or Yusha, do Grita Bharjana, then prepare it and then give. See, all that is fine there. Not that Peya is going to create a problem, just as it does in Madhya Nitya, Madhyavata Jwara and all. But it is not indicated and it's not going to help anyway. So that is how we need to see that in Jeerna Chwara, don't go by Peyadikrama. And apart from that, typical only Kapaja Chwara. If we have typical only Kapaja Chwara, Yusha is a better choice. Starting, just don't give anything, only Sharanga or only Ushnodaka, fine. And if at all, we have to give some food. Then when a patient is ready, giving a Yusha with a little Amlarasa added to it, Like it could be Dadima, Amalakarasa, or whatever. It makes it tasty also, and it helps in Kapachura, removal of Kapachura also. So Yusha Prayoga is something which comes in very handy in those conditions. It's much better option at those times. So this is another one. Apart from these two, we have all these come under Nija Jwara, right? So we have the complete other group of what we call Agantuja Jwara. In Agantuja Jwara, absolute no to Peyadikrama. Agantuja Jwara, again the 4 types, Vicharaja, Vichapaja, Vichangaja, or Abhigataja, all 4 of them. When we get these cases who have had accidents and had a motor accident, when you're busy treating the other bruises and fracture or whatever has happened, you see that day, night, or the next day morning, the person comes with Jwara. That's heavy fever. How do we treat that Jwara? We have to treat it on the basis of Agantu Jwara. And in that, when we start with Peyadikrama, it is not going to work. And that's not indicated also. We have to start with Agantuja Jwara, which has a sneha as a part of it. So the best thing is you can as well avoid, once you know the Nidana, you can avoid the person going into that stage where Jwara can come in by giving Snehapana at that time. Of course, which Snehapana, how to give, all that matters, but still, they are to be not indicated directly in Agantu also. But sometimes what happens, there's an Agantu, Nidana, but by the time it gets converted into Jwara, there's a lot of gap there where Sanjay Prakopa, Kshatriya Kala would have happened. If the Jwara has come like that, then it is considered as a Nija Jwara. It is just because there is a remote Agantu Nidana, we cannot consider that as a Agantu Jwara. So we have to go ahead with Peyadikrama as per the lines of Nija Taruna Jwara. Hope this is clear. And one Abhishangaja, very common, and